Hey guys, I'm Heidi Priebe. Welcome back to my channel, or welcome if this is your first time here. On this channel, we talk about our relationship with ourselves, our relationship with other people, and lately we've been talking a lot about how to build intimacy. In this video, I want to go over something that is maybe one of my most requested topics, which is how do you know that the time is right to be vulnerable with someone? So I have people kind of asking this question from various ends of the attachment spectrum. So those coming from the more avoidant side of the attachment spectrum might be learning vulnerability and intimate self-sharing as kind of a new skill in their relationships. Whereas those who come from the anxious side of the spectrum might actually need to do the work on figuring out how to discern who it's safe to be vulnerable with. So you may be a little bit prone to over-disclosing and over-trusting people with your vulnerabilities if you have historically erred more anxious. So in this video, we're going to talk about how to know when it is the appropriate time and with whom it is appropriate to be vulnerable with. Now, there is no perfect science to this. You can never guarantee that an instance of sharing something vulnerable with another person is going to end well or go in your favor. So what this video is going to talk about is how to make sure that you are at the least making a reasonably safe bet when it comes to opening up and becoming more vulnerable with someone. We're going to talk not just about how to identify the signs of a safe other, but also how to identify green flags inside of yourself that you are at a point where you are emotionally capable of opening yourself up to another person with respect to the fact that it might not go the way you want it to. Sometimes being vulnerable feels bad, doesn't go the way that we would hope, actually creates ruptures in our relationship that we can't find a way to repair. And so figuring out who it might be reasonably safe for you to practice vulnerable self-sharing with is going to be really instrumental in making sure that you are not senselessly harming yourself by being vulnerable in instances where it doesn't really help you or the other person to do that. So, without further ado, we're going to get into some of the signs or some of the green flags that it's a good time for you to start being vulnerable with another person. So, green flag number one in the other is that you have seen this person display a pattern of taking their own and other people's emotions seriously. So if we are looking specifically at emotional vulnerability, what we want to be looking at in the other person is, do they have a pattern of taking emotions seriously, as opposed to kind of having a pattern of scoffing at, dismissing, or even expressing contempt towards their own or other people's more vulnerable emotions. And this is often a trait that you can observe just in everyday conversations or interactions. So I remember one time being in a conversation with two kind of new friends, and one of them was telling this story about how he was seeing this girl and she was so obsessed with him. He liked her, but she wanted to get married and have kids, and he was so not into that. And the other friend looked at him and went, "Well, are you going to talk to her about that? That seems like a pretty important factor in whether or not you guys are going to continue in a relationship, so I'm surprised you haven't brought it up to her yet." And the stark difference in the emotional maturity there became instantly clear, right? If I were looking for someone to be vulnerable with and to share my feelings with, knowing that those feelings would be relatively safe and taken seriously by the other person, which of those two people would it make more sense to put my trust in? The one who has this kind of air of superiority and contempt around other people having feelings, or the one who has a more balanced perspective? So little moments like these are the ones you want to watch out for when you're figuring out who it's safe to be vulnerable around. So green flag is that they don't think other people are weird or weak for having feelings, and that you've observed a pattern of them treating other people's feelings seriously and with respect. Sign number two, and this one pertains to the self. It's a green flag that you're likely ready to be vulnerable with someone if you have a clear reason for why you want to be vulnerable with that person, and that reason is appropriate within the context of your current relationship. So, there are many good reasons to be a little bit more vulnerable in relationship. An example might be you are getting to know someone and you want to test out, what if I get a little bit more personal, a little bit more real with them? How are they going to respond? Because that's going to give you information about whether or not you're able to get closer with that person. Being close often means doing a little bit of that vulnerable self-sharing that is inherent to co-regulation a lot of the time. But you have to make sure that you are doing this in a way that is appropriate to the context of your current relationship. So if you are on a second date with someone, it might not be appropriate at that point in your relationship to let them know everything about your childhood trauma. We have to look at why we are sharing what we're sharing and whether or not it is the appropriate time and place to share that much. Am I sharing that much because I think it actually makes sense for them to know that much about me on a second date? Or am I sharing all of this because in this moment I feel dysregulated? I'm unable to regulate myself around whatever memory has just come up or whatever feeling I'm experiencing. So I'm putting it all on the table and hoping that they can help return me to equilibrium. The big things, the things that are very raw and intense, for most people don't come up until the relationship is already fairly established. That doesn't mean you can't reference difficult things you've been through. However, if you're looking to do really big, intense co-regulating with a person you don't know that well, it's highly likely that you might need to do some work on adjusting your own boundaries to make sure that you're not practicing reckless vulnerability. Reckless vulnerability is when we are not establishing boundaries around who it is and is not safe for us to be vulnerable with. We are simply handing over all of our psychological stuff to anyone who we think will listen because we don't know how to self-regulate around it ourselves. And if you struggle to figure out where the limits are in this capacity, try asking friends, loved ones, maybe a therapist if you're able to talk to one, what they think is appropriate in terms of how much to share when in a relationship. But the important part here is that if you are able to zoom out and put in proper context why you're sharing, what you're sharing, when you're sharing it, you're also going to be able to properly contextualize whatever response you get. So if you are sharing something with someone because you're trying to get to know them better, and you test it out, and you find that they're kind of closed off or that they have a reaction that doesn't make you feel very good in response to what you shared, now you have information, right? You learn, okay, if this person isn't particularly open to deep sharing or to talking about things that feel a little bit more emotional or a little bit more vulnerable, maybe that means I need to take a step back until it feels like they're ready to go there with me. Green flag number 3 that somebody is a good person to be vulnerable with is that they have been receptive and attentive to small things that you've been vulnerable about in the past, or to small conflicts that you've had in the past. So the idea here, again, is that you want to increase the vulnerability levels in a relationship in intervals. So you don't go from 0 to 100, right? You don't start at nice to meet you and on date 2 go to here's the worst thing that's ever happened to me and all of the feelings I've never found a way to process around it. You want to go from nice to meet you to what are you interested in, to how do you feel about X, Y, and Z, to what's going on for you lately, to what is the greater context of your life and your childhood and your experiences, and how are they all converging in this moment. And that progression takes time, as it should, because trust has to get built in tiny intervals along the way, right? Can I trust you to keep the small agreements that we make to each other? Yes or no? Can I trust you if a conflict comes up between us to handle it respectfully? Yes or no? Can I trust you to be consistent and to keep confidence in the areas that you claim you would keep confidence? We take tiny steps in the direction of increased trust and increased vulnerability if we are approaching things from a secure place. And if you're getting respectful responses at every little step along the way, or when disrespect happens, if you're able to address it and come to a conclusion that actually changes the way the two of you relate in the future for the better, all of those are green signs that you can get a little bit more vulnerable with that person. Vulnerability green flag number 4. The vulnerability balance in your relationship with this person is approximately equal. So they're sharing with you and disclosing things about themselves to you in approximately equal measure as you're sharing with them and disclosing things about yourself to them. This is what a secure relationship looks like. Both people are comfortable with the fact that both they have feelings, needs, desires, and vulnerabilities, and that the other person does as well. There isn't this dynamic where one person is constantly being vulnerable and pouring their heart out, and the other person is constantly receiving it, but not being vulnerable in return. That's more of either a limerent or a caretakey dynamic, right? Both people are not seeing each other as equals in that case. So this is just another one to watch out for. When I am honest and open with this person, are they being honest and open about their feelings with me in return? If yes, that's a pretty good sign. If not, it might be a sign that I want to take a step back because an unequal relationship, for whatever reason, is starting to develop here. And it's not the most self-protective thing to do to continue to make yourself vulnerable towards someone who you know almost nothing about in return. And that's a really important one that those who err on the side of overdoing vulnerability tend to naturally miss. So just know if your inclination is to not watch out for this one and start logging it in your own mind. Green flag number 5, that it's a good time to be vulnerable with someone, is that you have a pretty clear awareness of the impact your vulnerability might have on them. So you are not looking at them as kind of a savior or a parent figure who is going to be there to endlessly take your vulnerability and help you transform it into a better feeling. You're aware that they are also their own individual with a complex set of needs and feelings and experiences, and there's a possibility that your share is going to trigger something in them, or that they're not actually going to be capable of responding to you in the way that you would like. And so going into the sharing period, you're aware of the fact that something like that could happen. So this might be as simple as just checking in on what's going on for this person right now. What does their week look like this week? Are there things that are on their plate that are causing them stress? Is it likely that they have the emotional capacity right now to take on something that feels kind of heavy for me? And the more we know people and the closer we are to them, the more we're going to have a natural sense of this. The less we know people and the less of a natural awareness we have of all of that, the more we're going to have to be explicit and ask them about those things. So this can be as simple as reaching out and going, hey, there's something in particular that I'd really like to talk to you about. Can you tell me when might be a good time for you if you're open to that? And then being receptive to whatever they tell you in response, to make sure that you are staying respectful of their experience. Green flag number 6, that it might be a good time to practice vulnerability with someone, is that in the past, they have been firm but kind about asserting their boundaries. So what you don't want to assume here is that if somebody has never asserted a boundary to you, or never made it clear what is and isn't okay with them, that anything goes. That's actually venturing into pretty dangerous territory. What you want to look out for is, does someone make it explicit and clear when they have reached an emotional limit, when they need time and space to themselves, when they are feeling overwhelmed or upset or hurt? Do they have a pattern of communicating those things? And are you clear on where their boundaries lie? The reason why this is important is because if you are being vulnerable with someone who is not good at knowing where their own boundaries are and who has a tendency to caretake or to go past their limits when they see someone else in need, you may be setting yourself up for either a codependent response, where they try to take on too much in response to your vulnerability, or where they pull back without a lot of explanation because they're not able to consciously recognize the point where they became overwhelmed and needed to disconnect. So again, a green flag here is that this person has a history of being clear yet kind about where their boundaries lie. So when you're going to them with something more raw, something more vulnerable, you can trust that they are going to behave in a self-protective way and that they are going to respect their own boundaries in relation to your problem rather than becoming enmeshed with it, which again is the birthplace of codependency. Green flag number 7 is the direct inverse of this. You know where your limits and boundaries lie, and you feel as though you are capable of recognizing them when you hit a limit or a boundary in real time and taking care of yourself around that limit or boundary. In order to be vulnerable in a secure, non-reckless way, we have to be able to recognize what's happening when we start to feel overwhelmed, disrespected, or triggered in real time, and we have to know how to take care of ourselves in those moments. Otherwise, what happens is the thing that we are sharing, we become desperate for the other person to have a specific response to. And as soon as we are desperate for someone to have a specific response to our vulnerability, we are at high risk of starting to subtly tweak or exaggerate our story in order to get the response we want out of them. And then we are no longer behaving vulnerably. We are unconsciously behaving in a manipulative way in order to get the soothing that we need because we can't give that soothing to ourselves. To practice safe and secure vulnerability means having an awareness of where our own limits and boundaries are and knowing how to pull back and protect and soothe ourselves if we hit that limit. This part is very important because this is the thing that allows us to share vulnerably without becoming codependent or enmeshed in the process. If you want to throw out absolutely everything from this video except one point, please keep this one. Knowing your boundaries and limits, being able to recognize them in real time, and knowing when it is the appropriate point to take a step back and self-soothe is vital for practicing secure and healthy vulnerability. Green flag number 8 is a simple one, but a lot of us are quick to forget it. It is a green flag to have a tender, vulnerable, interconnected feeling with someone if they explicitly tell you, now is a good time for me. And that consent seems relatively enthusiastic, so they genuinely seem to be open to hearing what you have to say, and overall, you're both on the same page about the fact that you're going to have one of those conversations. I'm not saying this needs to happen every single time, particularly if you are in a longer-term relationship with this person, where you've already built a high degree of trust and interpersonal attunement. However, in the early stages, it just does not hurt to ask if you initially are not sure. Green flag number 9, that it might be a good time to practice vulnerability with someone, is that you know how to take care of yourself if you don't get the response that you want from your sharing. This one, once again, is incredibly important. If you go into a very vulnerable, very high-stakes conversation with nothing in place to help you deal with the potential fallout if it doesn't go the way you want it to go, you are behaving very recklessly, and your inner child is going to be the one who pays the price of that. In any relationship, no matter how secure it is, things will 100% without a shadow of a doubt go wrong at some point. Some conflict will come up. There will be a period, whether it is a matter of hours or a matter of days, where you need healthy space from that person in order to return to your individual selves before coming back together and figuring things out. And in that time, you are going to need other support systems, other people you can talk to, other activities you can turn to, other ways you can soothe and regulate yourself that does not involve this other person. It is a green flag if you know, even if this does not turn out the way I want it to, I have a plan in place for what I will do to keep myself okay. Right? That is being a secure, protective parent for our inner children. And last but not least, the 10th green flag that it is a good time for you to practice vulnerability with another human being is that you're comfortable with the thought of trading off and being a secure base for that person in the future. So again, in secure dynamics, both people take turns being the slightly more regulated person while the other is feeling a little bit more vulnerable. And that balance is approximately equal. There will, of course, be periods where one person needs a little bit more support than the other, but overall, the balance should not be significantly skewed in one direction. So really ask yourself, before disclosing over and over again something vulnerable to another person, am I comfortable with them being just as vulnerable with me? As opposed to a situation where it kind of turns you off a little bit, or you feel a little bit disgusted at the thought of them turning to you for care, support, and advice when they're feeling vulnerable. If that's the case, it's likely you're not looking for a relationship of equals to have a secure dynamic with. You're looking for more of a parent figure, right? If you are consistently finding yourself attracted to people who seem very invulnerable themselves and whom, if you're really honest with yourself, you kind of don't have a lot of problems that they share with you. And again, you can have any type of relationship you want. You're just not necessarily setting yourself up for the safest, most emotionally secure situation if that's the one you're walking into. So, big green flag is that you know without a shadow of a doubt that this is an equal parts relationship. You can share with them because in approximately equal part, they can and are wanting to share with you as well. All right, that's all I have to say for today on the topic of green flags when it comes to vulnerability. As always, let me know in the comments what your thoughts, feelings, perspectives are. I love you guys. I hope you're taking care of yourselves and each other, and I will see you back here again super soon.